So going to talk about best practice communication today, and communication in small business is just so important. So I thought we'd put together, people are either over communicating or under communicating. We're finding a lot with our clients. So we're going to talk about best practice communication and what that looks like. So this is us, we're What's Next. I think it said What's Net before, but we are What's Next. We're a HR consultancy firm, so we provide the services that a corporate HR team would provide internally in a big business. We provide those services out to small to medium businesses. We do everything from strategy, performance frameworks, recruitment, IR, anything you'd get from a big HR team. That's what we provide to the small businesses. We go across all industries. We've been around for about 18, I think we're in our 18th year this year. We're working with businesses that are going through change. So they're either growing, they're getting smaller, they're going to merge, they're going through succession, some type of change. So what I'm going to focus on today is, because we get across all industries, we get to have a look of what's happening out there. And so we've also got an office in New York. So we get a bit of the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. So we're going to give a bit of a snapshot of what I see today. We're going to talk about our best practice communication methodology, which is the 4 C's. Going to talk also about a best practice framework for communication, because I think giving some guidance around communication is really important, so we're not over or under communicating. And then we're going to dive into one-on-ones and talk about some challenges around that as well. So what we're seeing at the moment, what we're seeing around small businesses at the moment is a lot of economic uncertainty. So a lot of pressure, a lot of political pain. So you see over in obviously with Trump getting in over in the Northern Hemisphere. And then we're going to get an election this year as well in Australia. A lot of economic uncertainty and a lot of change. So resizing projects have been really big for us. So resizing is redundancy projects and reduction of cost base across business. And we've seen a real spike in that in the last 18 months. So to put that into perspective, over the first 16 years we're around, we do probably 2 or 3 of these projects a year. In the last 18 months, we've done about 30 of these projects. So just to show what the economy is doing at the moment. And that trend has continued into 2025 as well. Another big trend we're seeing is around artificial intelligence. Especially in the Northern Hemisphere, it's been taken up a lot in the small business space, but we're seeing it change industries altogether. We're seeing it change organisational structures and the shape of a business, and we're seeing it change roles within that business at the same time as well. So a lot of change being pushed by the artificial intelligence. And there's a real resurgence in offshoring and outsourcing in small business. So outsourcing, obviously, your finance or your marketing or your HR, these sort of things, but accessing expertise without putting on those headcount inside a business. We're seeing that certainly lift again in the last 18 months, but more so even offshoring as well. So everyone would be aware of like the Philippines and India and places like this to offshore to get the skill set into your business. We've really seen that jumping now into places like South America, South Africa, Pakistan. So a lot of countries now providing those services to businesses all around the world. And so it is an option to be looking into this. South America specifically, we've actually got a couple of staff in Venezuela at the moment who work overnight for us and do a fantastic job, double degree qualified. There's some real options around in the outsourcing space. And the biggest challenges that we're seeing across businesses is around leadership and really driven by the hybrid workspaces. So the hybrid working still is causing some trouble in that middle management layer with a lot of businesses. And also the multiple generations in the workspace at the same time. So I think there's up to 6, or there's the most generations we've ever had in the workplace at the moment. And that with the hybrid working is just, it's catching people out that aren't strong managers in the first place. So that's been a massive trend that we've seen this year. And then basic communication breakdowns. That's what I want to focus on today. And there's a couple of approaches here I want to look at, but the basic communication breakdown is what we've been getting through our anonymous surveys that we run with clients. We've seen a real spike in issues around communication in small business. So that's what I'll focus on today. So this one's for your Mentimeter, just to pop it in there. So how would you define the communication in your organisation? So one of the options is sporadic, top-down communication, bottom-up communication, or deliberate and two-way communication. So pop it in there and we'll just get a bit of a cross-section across the group. That's great. We've got a few sporadic, which is quite common. We've got a few there, deliberate and two-way communication, which is a real focus. That's great. Not much bottom up, which is good, but we do have a few clients where they get a lot of feedback back to the business, which they act on too prematurely. So there is some bottom up communication around, but there's a bit of a mix across there, but deliberate and two-way is great. That's what we like to focus on and we think is the best way. So this is the communication methodology. And some of these things aren't going to be too new to you, but putting these things into place helps you balance up the right amount of communication. So this is the methodology that we use that we think really builds trust. We call it the 4 Cs. So number 1 is cadence, and it's all around predictable interactions. So understanding when the touch points are throughout your business. Is it a one-on-one? It's a management meeting? If it's a performance review, like when these things occur throughout the year. So it's all about predictable interactions with cadence. We've got consistency is the second one, making sure that all your managers are doing it the same way. So we find that sometimes the business owner's communicating one way and some of the line managers are doing it different, or one branch in another state's doing it a different way than we're doing it in Queensland. So getting the same process, same agenda around some of these touch points is really important. And then the other one is clarity, setting the expectations really clear and making sure that we're removing the roadblocks, but there's an expectation from a communication perspective between a manager and an employee and who does what. And thirdly, and most importantly, is that there's consequences when it doesn't occur. So if the business has agreed to do communication a certain way, both parties, the managers and the employees, need to lock into that. If they're not doing it, there needs to be some type of reprimand or some type of disciplinary action to make sure that it's not pushed aside for something that they perceive as more important. So cadence, predictable interactions, consistency, same process, and using the same agendas and the same outcomes. Clarity around setting explanations and setting expectations really clear, and consequences, really making sure those consequences are there if things don't occur. So this is a methodology we like to put across all types of communication. So best practice communication is really bridging that gap between the business owner's instincts and effective leadership. So communication links everything together. It's like the glue. It's like the glue in your culture. It brings everything together. And we really want to build that out quite deliberately. So most managers, as we know, don't set out there to be people managers, right? They're technically good at something. They've gone to university. They've done some type of discipline. And over time, they've become a people manager. So we find there's a lot of accidental managers out there. But people really need feedback, and they need to be able to predict when that feedback's going to occur and have opportunity to meet with the right people inside of your company. So that feedback needs to be quite clear. And then the third thing is that also your employees, they've got an innate need to be able to provide feedback back up the chain as well. So that's something that helps to progress along the way. So these 3 things are interesting when we approach communication and the framework around it. But just remember that most of your managers don't set out to do this, and they need to be taught how communication is important as part of their people management. So communication will make or break your culture. And this is important to think about. A lack of it will cause a negativity to come in, and too much of it can cause fear and overwhelm as well. So getting the right balance of this is what we look at through what we call the best practice communication framework. So there's 5 pieces to this. They're all quite simple pieces and they all work together though. So number 1 is one-on-ones, and really suggest that they happen on a weekly basis. This is the foundation of all of your communication, is around the one-on-one between a manager and an employee. And that's most simple form, but it's also the way that breaks down the whole framework if it's not done and consistently. Then we suggest a monthly management meeting, which is kind of a mix of operational and strategy, but it's bringing the managers together. So we've got our employees with our manager, where we're learning about the employee itself and their operations and in the weeds type meeting with the one-on-one. But then the monthly management meeting's much more around operations and strategy together. And then we talk about a quarterly board meeting. And if you don't have a board, that could be with your accountant, or it could be with your advisor, or it could be with your family if it's a family business, but a more strategic meeting once a quarter. So we've got weekly one-on-ones, monthly management meeting, a more strategic meeting on a quarterly basis. And then we go back to the employee themselves and getting a biannual performance review. So twice a year, a formal review around where they're going, where they could progress to, the succession and opportunities for them within the business as well. So formally booking that in. And then the 5th and final part of that best practice communication framework is around an annual anonymous survey. So this is where we find out as business owners around the gaps or things that we don't know, the blind spots, and it's data for us to improve overall. So we find that these 5 things together work really, really well and really underpin your culture. So weekly one-on-ones, monthly management meeting, quarterly board meetings, biannual performance reviews, and annual anonymous survey. Now, one of those things on their own isn't as effective. We need to get them all together. This really underpins what we call the best practice communication framework. So just another question here for your Mentimeter is, how often do you complete formal one-on-ones with your direct reports? So how line managers in your business, how often are they doing one-on-ones? Weekly, fortnightly, monthly, or never? So got a few there at never, a few there at monthly, 23% at fortnightly, and 45% at weekly, which is great. Now, weekly one-on-ones are really about that interaction between manager and employee, and seeing half of you guys doing that on a weekly basis is fantastic. Fortnightly in small business can be managed if everything else is in place, but the problem is with the fortnightly, if you miss one, you're out to monthly and it starts to be a big gap. And things like one-on-ones, they're about the employee, they're not about you. They're about that employee getting the contact time with the manager as well. So that's a good mixed result over everyone. And we're going to just dive a little bit deeper into one-on-ones. So the reason behind one-on-ones specifically, and just so you know, there's some downloaded if you haven't got them on your table, of the methodology with the 4 Cs, the best practice communication framework is there in the downloading. And then there's also an agenda for a one-on-one, which if you've got there on your table, we can talk to in a minute as well. But it really is the centerpiece of all communication is one-on-ones. It's also the first thing that drops off when everyone's busy, right? But it's so important to get that contact. And so just diving into that, really, weekly is the way that works best. It really is the best way. If you can manage it, weekly is the best for a one-on-one from a cadence perspective. But it's about empowering both parties in a one-on-one. There's the responsibility on both sides, the manager and the employee. So the employee role, they really own the meeting when it's a one-on-one. So just think about that. It's their meeting, it's their time. And so we need to be respectful of that as managers and business owners. They own the meeting. They should be speaking probably 80% of the time and really running that meeting. So it's not the manager there giving them an update on what's going on. It should be a balance where they're speaking most of the time, and we say up to about 80% of the time. And then the employee provides what I call a micro update or information from the coalface that needs to go back up to the CEO or the owner of the business or the shareholders or whatever it's structured as, that information. So people running one-on-ones need to understand that it's a conduit of communication both ways, right? So the employee's providing the updates that need to go up, but the manager is also providing those same macro updates of the business that need to go back down at the same time. So both of those things need to happen. And where we see one-on-ones fall down a lot is when the manager then talks about all the great stuff and cheers and backslaps, all the good stuff, but doesn't actually challenge, coach and confront around some of the things that need to have occurred for that employee as well. So really important that the manager takes on that role of challenging, coaching and confronting throughout a one-on-one, and don't just sit back and listen or do all the talking, for instance. And then getting comfortable in that conflict in those situations is really important to move the business forward and move the productivity of everything forward as well. So the employee versus the manager role is slightly different. And if we think back to the methodology here, this is around clarity and making it really clear around the agenda. So again, got an example there you can download or you've got a hard copy. But the way I look at leadership and management, there's 3 buckets. There is an empathy bucket, there's a vulnerability bucket, and then there's a commercial acumen bucket. So 3 separate buckets, and I look at them as being balanced, those 3 things. Now, a one-on-one is a great opportunity to think about those 3 things or put that methodology over the top of the one-on-one. So I talk about checking in or doing a rating about checking in with an employee. This is an opportunity to learn a little bit about them. Are they unwell? What's going on in their world? Have they got something that's a big life event coming up? There's a lot of learning you can do at an empathetic level. And empathy isn't sympathy. Empathy is just meeting an employee at the level that they're at and understanding and learning about them. It can be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes for newer managers, but Things like, I like to check in out of 10, just make it nice and easy. How are you feeling at the moment? 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. Where do you sit on the scale? And that just gives you an opportunity to start a conversation. Someone says 2, it's like, okay, let's talk about why that's the case. If someone's saying 10 every time, it's probably out of kilter as well. But you can learn a lot by checking in with the employee. And I do it with a word, and I do it with a number scale. So I give them a chance to give it out of 10 score, and also give them a word to explain how they're feeling at the moment. And you can learn a lot just from those little questions, and it just starts the conversation. But this is you being empathetic as a manager towards your employee and just learning what's going on. If you found out their kids are sick, you may not press as hard this week with some of the work that's got to be done, and you can start to use that empathy in your leadership. The same way with the vulnerability, you can share stories about yourself and build trust in these one-on-one opportunities with your employee as well. And say, look, when I started or when I was at the stage that you're at, it took me a bit longer to learn this system, so maybe be a bit fair on yourself to spend some more time doing that. And you can share those stories and build trust with the employee as well. And then, of course, you need to be running the business, so you've got the commercial acumen. But the check-in, celebrating success, another thing that people forget to do is to celebrate success. So often we finish a big project, or we place a candidate, or we win a big job, win some work, and we're sort of on to the next thing, right? So a one-on-one's a great opportunity to say to the employee, hey, well done, that was awesome, it was great to hit that on time, or really, you did a great job picking up that client. Now, giving that positive, celebrating that success, great idea in a one-on-one. It really sets the tone for the rest of the meeting. Then there's the accountability. And so at the end of a one-on-one, I'd like to set a few actions for the next week so we can close the loop off. So if you've got those actions that you set the week before, ask how they went with them, hold them accountable to achieving what they said they'd achieve, and it's a great way to hold them accountable and move everything forward. So accountability, closing the actions of the last meeting, and then you can provide some updates. Manager provides the macro updates, the employee provides the micro updates, but everyone's finding out what's going on in their different parts of responsibility. There's an opportunity too in a one-on-one to do some problem solving if someone is stuck. So I like a problem-solving section or a decisions to be made section. So sometimes we can procrastinate on a project or get stuck on something. So sometimes having something down there in your agenda as a decision to be made in the one-on-one is a great way to move things forward, move that dial forward, right? So it's a great time to put those in as well. There's always an opportunity to do some educational mentoring in a one-on-one, but we don't want to be spending hours and hours on these if we're doing them on a weekly basis. So there's a chance, though, to do some mentoring. If you've got lighter content one week, you could talk about something that's happened during the week or a better way to achieve something, and do some mentoring and don't waste that time when you can be mentoring that individual as well. And then, of course, any hurdles or red flags or issues that are stopping them from achieving what they need to achieve. It's a great way to work through that together when you've got this one-on-one time, and then set the new actions for the new week, right? And that comes back around again on the loop. So you can see if you stick to this rough agenda with a one-on-one, there's a real outcomes for both parties. But there's also a responsibility for the manager and the employee to come prepared into that meeting. And the manager is learning just as much as the employee is in those situations, because they might get someone tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, where are we up to with this? They've got to find out the information that they want to get in a one-on-one environment. So the agenda we've got there, I think, is really helpful just to work through, and especially when you're starting out doing these, or you've got some new managers running a one-on-one situation. So just to go back over those 3 things, well, actually, there's a few pushbacks we get with one-on-ones too, which we'll talk about here. So often, and you might be thinking about this too in your head, is people will say, we don't have time. And it might be the employee, it might be the manager. We just don't have time to do this once a week. It doesn't need to be a big meeting. It can be 15 minutes if you're quite succinct and you've got a preparation on both sides. Other times, like, you might need the full hour or you might need the full 45 minutes. But there's always time to make time in this, and it's a part of a line manager's responsibility or a business owner's responsibility if they're doing it with their managers. So we've got to think about that. This is important to have this touch point. Becomes even more important when we've got things like hybrid working, when we're not seeing everyone every day. So we talk all the time is another one that people talk about. Oh, we catch up every day, but it's different. This is a formal process. There's an art to running a one-on-one versus just catching up with someone or past the water cooler or having a quick call or a text message, right? That's just living through your business life. This is something that should be scheduled in the calendar, consistent every week. and we know what the responsibilities of both sides are. Often the employee won't buy in, or sometimes the manager won't buy into the process. So there's a real education required around both sides to understand the importance of the one-on-one. And yeah, I'm not clear on why we need to do this. These are some of the pushbacks we get, and also non-action or non-movement in some of those actions that we've set. So there needs to be some type of pushback, some consequence for that not being followed through. So these are ways to move everything forward. So these are challenges you'll hear, but the manager really needs to challenge, coach, and confront the employee to make sure things are moving forward. And following this sort of framework really helps with that. So there's 3 things there we've talked about. We've talked about our communication methodology, and that's the 3 C's, the cadence and predictable interactions, the clarity around really removing the roadblocks and setting the expectations, consistency, making sure everyone's doing it the same way, because that's what happens when you've got a few managers. Some are doing it different to others. And consequence, if people aren't doing this should be one of their KPIs. If you're a line manager, there is a people management responsibility, and we've got to remember that. It could be your best salesperson you've got in the business, but if they're managing a sales team, there's some people management responsibility there for that salesperson as well that we need to really consider. So they're the methodology, the framework, weekly one-on-ones, monthly management meetings, quarterly or executive board meeting, a biannual performance review twice a year for a performance review, an official one, and then an anonymous survey once a year. Those 3 things become the framework, the best practice framework. And then we've got the agenda there as well. So we've got an exercise here to do. And the exercise here, before I go into the exercise, I'll just share a story. And it's about hybrid working. So we've had a recent new client this year, and they weren't doing one-on-ones and they weren't doing the proper catch-ups, and they actually worked out that they hadn't seen an employee for 3 months. So if you think about that, they've been turning their camera off in meetings, they've been making excuses about their internet, they hadn't come into the office. So it's 3 months that they physically hadn't seen this individual. So when I'm talking about one-on-ones, they really need to be face-to-face or on video, really, really important. They hadn't seen this person for 3 months. The risk to that business is huge, because the duty of care is on them to make sure that person's safe, they're well. They happen to be doing a highly technical role as well at the same time. This person came into the office to get some gear because they were moving interstate, and they were extremely, extremely unwell. They'd been abusing drugs and alcohol. They were gaunt, they were grey, they were puffy eyes, they smelled like booze. They were in a horrible state, a horrible, horrible physical state, and it was an emergency situation. And this has ended well, thank goodness. It had a brother come out from another country to come and look after this person, but it was going down a really, really, really slippery slope. Now, this business owner is absolutely beside themselves because they weren't aware. So you think when I talk about communication and best practice communication, we need to consider the well-being of our team as well. And with hybrid working now, we don't see them every day. We don't get to see them all the time. So just a quick little story there to think about that, some of this stuff is a real risk mitigation too, and it's a real, you got to consider what's happening outside of the walls of your office. So this is a start, continue exercise. So thinking about communication and the methodology, the framework, and then the one-on-one agendas. Just want to, I think if I click this, it should go through. What do you want to start from a communication perspective in 2025? Is there anything that stood out for you across what we've been talking about? Type it into this word cloud and share it with the rest of the group, because we'll be able to talk to that. Excuse me. We'll be able to talk about them as they come up. So yeah, that should come through as people type. So it's good to share what you'd like to start or what you'd like to start from a communication perspective. The pre-book meetings is great. Having it locked into calendar is really important. Purposeful conversation, I love that. Like having an agenda, even if you just do it for the first few months, really helps you think it through. Surveys, absolutely. Some one-on-ones in general. So there's some cool stuff here. That's what I was hoping that you would take from this, and that's really great. Coaching, more accountability. And it's true, right? These are opportunities. This teaches someone how to manage if you follow through with this framework. It actually shows people that aren't used to it. And when you're not a natural people manager, or you haven't had a decade of experience managing people, like staff are hard, people are hard. So if you follow this, it actually get you to improve what you're doing, improve your management skills, and improve that individual as well. Sharing the wins. Yeah, some really great stuff there, so fantastic. We'll jump on to what you want to stop. So is there anything there that you've picked up that you want to stop or change in the way that you do things? Anyone brave enough to put something up there? Just take a moment as it comes through. Making excuses, I like that. It's an easy thing not to do, this communication, and it's very basic, but if you've got some structure behind it, you'll see the benefits. Being too busy, so making time, lack of consistency, not speaking up, accepting everything is a really interesting one too. Like holding people accountable in these situations is really, really important. Being afraid of feedback, really. Well, this is probably the thing we see the most with business owners, is they're a little bit scared to ask, right? They've had some type of feedback in the past that's hurt and stung, and it always does because it's emotional when it's your business. But yeah, asking for feedback and being brave enough is really, really good. I'm sure we can get copies of this or we can download it down the track as well. Thanks, Anita. And we'll jump through to what you want to continue. And this is a great thing to share as the group, because if you're doing something that's working now, and it might have been something we've talked about, but it could be something different with communication, pop it up on the board because someone else in the room might learn from that as well and be able to take that on. Open dialogue. So I'm assuming it's quite structured, that open dialogue, and a good two-way communication, I think what someone's saying there. The daily huddle. So huddles are really great too, and I haven't got huddles in here. We actually do huddles twice a week. Over COVID, we actually started doing them a lot more than that, but we've gone back to twice a week on a huddle. Huddles are great, but they're different. There's a different outcome. So each one of these touch points has a different outcome. You know, we're focused in on one-on-ones today, but the management meetings, huddles. So huddles, there's an education component. There's a whole lot of different things, but there's a different outcome for these meetings. They're not just a box-ticking exercise, and I think that's what I'm trying to get across today, is there is a bit of an art behind this. So if you've got the structure and you understand the outcomes, there's some really great things to do there. People are doing one-on-ones, that's great. Frameworks, individual plans, daily meetings, two-way communication. That's a big one because a lot of people, their managers, especially greener managers or newer managers, will do a lot of presentation to the person that they're talking to in a one-on-one situation, whereas we really need them to, be two-way conversation. It needs to be a two-way conversation, not the manager doing all the talking, because this is the way to build trust, and it really does help with your culture. That's awesome. Some great stuff there, guys. I appreciate you putting them up there and sharing with everyone. Okay, so I want you to have a look at this and let this one sink in, because this one's really important. But wherever there is a void in your communication, negativity fills that void. So if you don't do one-on-ones for a few weeks, or you're not doing your management meetings, people start making it up what's going on, right? They might just start to read into that. They might to get the wrong idea. It really can affect your culture when negativity fills those gaps. So being very deliberate in your planning around your communication gives you something to work to and something to your employees can expect to occur, so that they know that the minimum time that they've got is a full week that they're going to be away from their manager, and that's the 7 days. It's not a long time. So they can hold questions. They can wait till then. But if they don't know when the next one-on-one is, you can see how negativity can really get pulled into this. So just a really good thing to remember. So a couple of takeaways. There's a lot of technical advancements at the moment, and I really don't want you to look at that as the way to fix your communication within a business. Like, these are old-fashioned, what I'm talking about, these touch points, but they're really, really powerful and important. And that art of management and managing the performance of your individuals in your team and taking responsibility for that, and that two-way communication is something that's so important to business, regardless of all the technology. But there's a lot of economic uncertainty out there, which leads to overwhelm and fear. But if you've got these structured communication times, even things like the cyclone coming, get talking about it, seeing if the person's vulnerable in their house. Like, there's a lot of things there that there's benefits from this communication. So the surveys, we've really shown that the communication issues have spiked in the last 6 months. It's really been a focus of the anonymous survey. So we've seen communication be worse across the general public, or all of our clients for sure. The communication has dropped So that's why I'm focusing on it today. We've got the methodology there, which we talked about with cadence, consistency, clarity, and consequence. It's handy being 4 C's, you can remember it. We've got a great printout there to take home, it's worth having a look at, but predictable interactions from a cadence perspective, same process and agenda coming through consistency. That clarity is just setting the expectations, so important, and then consequence if it doesn't happen. Because if your one manager stops doing them and just let them go, then everything breaks down. And the best practice communication ecosystem, like we said, and we've got the printout, weekly one-on-ones, monthly management meetings, quarterly board meetings, biannual performance reviews, and the annual anonymous survey. So those scheduled one-on-ones, so important. Book them in, teach your managers how to use them, so they understand what you need to do in a one-on-one. And you master that communication in your business, and you will really master your culture. And it's really important. This communication is the link to good culture. So hopefully that was helpful, guys, and have a good rest of your afternoon.